Greetings, my name is Micah, and this is an additional video to my much more detailed critique of Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, where I'm going to offer my thoughts on the permadeath feature. Perhaps the most significant use of this psychosis, freak out the player mentality is this text here, which alludes very strongly to the inclusion of a permadeath mechanic. So in the game, every time she fails, the dark rot present on Senua's arm will grow, and if it reaches her head, that's the end. This is all the text tells you, and technically it's correct, because the rot can't reach her head before the game's conclusion, but does reach her head by the game's ending. It doesn't have to grow as a result of the player's failure in-game as such, but Senua's failure inside non-interactive moments act as predetermined moments for rot growth, sort of moving it up at set boundaries. So it doesn't technically lie to you. The way it's phrased, however, seems to intentionally allude to the presence of a permadeath mechanic where your save will be deleted if you die too many times and your progress will be lost. I think if this hadn't been literal text, there would have been a lot less discussion about it, since these animations play when you die, and the inference of something evil associated with the rot growing on the character's arm would have been more than enough to convey something to the player. I think the choice to literally tell the player this is an element through text, given the game's focus on voiceover, and that this is something the game never does again, is enough to believe that this misdirection was intentional. Outside of the game's development process and focus on psychosis, I think this particular feature has been the part of the game that has caused the most discussion concerning Hellblade, because it's incredibly clever. It seems to be bringing the player and Senua into alignment, scared of lies and misinformation, and looking around every corner to keep themselves safe, with some kind of thematic relevance. It's very open to interpretation, more so than most of the rest of the game, so I won't try to argue for or against the quality of this particular element. This is just really a conversation starter, not technically a game system after all. All I can do is tell you my experience of it and my interpretation of it. So I approached Hellblade like I do with most games, completely blind. I knew nothing about the game besides the basic premise when I cut myself off from pre-release information. So when I first played it, I believed this threat was of permadeath, and I continued to play with this belief for a few hours. At a certain point, I put it down for the night and spoke to a friend of mine about some of my thoughts on the game so far. All my friend had to say was, "Oh, by the way, about that permadeath thing, you know it's not real, right?" And the game was irreversibly altered. From there, I restarted the game, played the whole thing in one sitting, and had a very different kind of time with it. So I find myself in the unique position of having felt the game, parts of the game I had no other knowledge about, under both sides of this debate. Here is my take. The game felt far more full when I believed permadeath was a feature, and I think what that added to the atmosphere and experience of the game is more valuable than its thematic significance. Secondly, the game on whole does a good job at displaying the frightening nature of psychosis, and in behind-the-scenes footage, the team appears to be very eager to contribute positively to discussions on mental illness, and to try dispelling misconceptions around it. I can definitely understand Ninja Theory's desire to possibly bring these misconceptions to light and to use the player's preconceived notions against them in a way. However, I can't help but feel this particular abuse of a misconception has more to do with gaming than with mental illness, and more importantly, it has the ability to inform simply too much of the player's approach to the entire piece, not to seem a little misguided, as if the game's story needs this essential trickery to remain fully intact to contribute value, which of course isn't the case, but its early introduction makes it feel that way. Basically, the warning being so unique within the game and appearing to be so important to how someone experiences everything after it downplays the weight of everything after it. The game perhaps shouldn't have to rely on this deception, which people know and can easily be told is fake, in order for everything to hit hard while they're playing, but its mere presence makes that an impossibility. This being such a big moment and it being reinforced when you die, whether you know it's fake or not, threatens to undermine the real value of the tale and distract from what we can learn about psychosis from this story. It's not a bold-faced lie, but regardless of its intended function, it is reinforced, deliberately misleading information which can influence someone's approach to a discussion on mental illness, and I had gathered the game was trying to distance itself from that. Furthermore, the game does not imply that psychosis or mental illness on whole is something to ignore or brush aside, or something you're even able to if you want to. It's trying to increase awareness of the dangers after all, so I'm unsure about why it's so easy to ignore the danger of permadeath simply because I know better. The false permadeath and the ability to change the difficulty runs in direct conflict with the warning to be aware of the illness and its potentially dangerous effects, because I can and flat out did disregard this element on subsequent playthroughs. In doing so, and and in drawing so much attention to itself, it places far too much of the message of the game in jeopardy. Regardless of how an individual may interpret it, I'm unsure risking the message of the game was worth it. Maybe if there's any chance someone may disregard the game's message because it was fake, I don't think that risk should have been taken. As I said, this feature has been a major point of discussion within the community surrounding the game, and it appears to have been designed and phrased purely to have that effect, to spark discussion. However, based on my own experience that I just told you about, those who engage in discussion will have an inferior game experience to those who do not, so it feels doomed to contradict itself. Unless, of course, Ninja Theory deemed the experience of the game itself less important than the discourse it might start, which may not be out of the question. But I think the first point here that I made was the most important. I was gaining more from the game experience while playing with permadeath in mind. The permadeath's greatest benefit for the rest of the story, or at least what I felt when I thought it was real, was perhaps, ironically, focus. As a player, I was focused on every detail, trying to learn as much as I could from each image, each world. Given this focus, the game was able to surprise me with things contrasting with that which it had me focusing on before. Something that I've noticed recently in games I've played, particularly horror titles, is that death itself isn't really scary if you don't want it to be. Dying in a game might be violent, but it's not something I fear as a player if I just go, oh yeah, whatever. A specific way around this might be to design a specific thing alongside the death. So if I went back to the old faithful dead horse of Dark Souls, me being a long-form gaming channel, it's a big loss of progress that you then have to repeat, which is paired with death, and also the threat of not having your currency. In Five Nights at Freddy's, believe it or not, the death is paired with a jump scare, which makes dying a sudden thing. However, in quite a few games, it's very easy to watch a death screen and continue on playing the game unbothered by it. It, as a threat, is easy to numb yourself to, and it sometimes no longer carries enough weight to force the player to focus on playing the game well. If I was to be harsh, I'd say the presence of death is no longer of benefit or even of note in some games. It just doesn't matter. Hellblade gives you the impression that this has switched up to make its story hit harder. It tells you better take this seriously or we're going to kick you back to the title screen until you learn your lesson. As a player, I'm much more afraid of that because it threatens my experience. It's a threat that matters, which forces me to meet the story on its level. This is exactly the kind of design that makes room for great atmosphere and great storytelling, by forcing the player to meet the game in a conversation. Hellblade, however, takes this benefit for granted and doesn't seem to be aware of its true power. The thematic relevance of the threat, being like Senua's own misinformation, is simply less important than its ability to force the player into line would be. So much of the nuance and the weight of the atmosphere was completely lost after I heard a single piece of information, and I can never return to the way Hellblade felt for those first few hours. This alone is why I think permadeath should have been a real feature in the game, because it felt like a better game when I thought it was. I can't speak as to the staying power of the bluff over the course of the game. I am fairly sure I would have realized the game wasn't really that hard at some point or another, and it probably would have slipped to the back of my mind. As it stands, however, I don't really treat this as part of the game proper, more just a distraction from what's really going on. Like I said, this is very open to interpretation, so your mileage may vary, but I'm going to move on now and speak about the more tangible parts of the game as I experienced them.